Welcome to It's All About the Comments. Are comic book fans the worst thing to happen to comic book movies? Once upon a time, comic book films were made for everyone. From Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight trilogy to the early Marvel Cinematic Universe entries like Iron Man and the Avengers, these movies balanced broader themes, real-world stakes, and strong character arcs. They weren't just about capes and cosmic threats. They were accessible, compelling, and most importantly, culturally dominant. But something has shifted, and many would argue it isn't the studios that changed, it's the fans. This video explores whether comic book fans themselves are becoming the greatest obstacle to the genre's success. Has catering to their niche demands fractured what once was a mainstream powerhouse? Let's rewind to the golden era. Between 2008 and 2019, comic book movies exploded into global cinema. The Marvel formula, built on accessibility, humor, and character development, brought in billions. DC, though inconsistent, had its own triumphs with the gritty realism of The Dark Knight and the mythic scope of Man of Steel and Wonder Woman. What united these successes? They weren't comic accurate in the purest sense. Instead, they adapted source material for cinema. Characters were redesigned, plots restructured, and tone carefully balanced to appeal beyond comic shop regulars. In other words, they weren't made for comic book fans. They were made for everyone. Fast forward to today, and things look different. There's a growing pressure from vocal online communities to prioritize comic accuracy over cinematic clarity. As a result, we've seen shows and films packed with lore, multiverse logic, Easter eggs, and obscure characters that alienate general audiences. Take She-Hulk. Marketed as a legal comedy with fourth-wall breaking flair, it quickly devolved into a series of meta-jokes and cameos aimed almost exclusively at internet-savvy comic fans. Critics called it too online. Audiences were left wondering who the show was really for. Or look at The Flash, 2023. It leaned heavily into fan service, multiverse nostalgia, and deep-cut cameos, but struggled at the box office. The problem? Nostalgia isn't a story, and general viewers don't care about obscure alternate versions of characters they never connected with in the first place. Even James Gunn's Superman has already become a battleground before it's been released. Online factions argue over costume choices, casting, and tone. Many comic book fans have declared, "This one's for us." But that raises a troubling question. If it's not for general audiences anymore, who is it really for? There's an uncomfortable irony here. Comic book fans, long dismissed and overlooked, now have more influence than ever, and that influence may be shrinking the appeal of the genre they love. It's a classic case of the niche consuming the mainstream. Think about the rise of YouTube breakdowns, Reddit leaks, and Twitter fan campaigns. Studios increasingly write for the reaction, not the story. Scenes are engineered for screenshots, not substance. And when general audiences tune out, fans blame the studio, never questioning whether the growing inaccessibility is the real issue. Worse still, many comic book fans are deeply resistant to change. Much of the backlash we see today isn't about quality, it's about nostalgia. Fans want things to stay the same costumes, the same origins, the same tone they grew up with. But that nostalgia comes at a price. The comic book industry itself is in massive decline, in sales, relevance, and reach. Why? Because much of its output is outdated, often childish, and creatively exhausted. The storylines have had to grow more outlandish to stay fresh, leading to characters like Crypto the Superdog or sentient planets or cross-dimensional clones. To the average viewer, it's just nonsense. And when films try to reflect that style of storytelling, general audiences can't relate. They disengage, not because they hate superheroes, but because they can't connect to what those heroes have become. Nowhere is this more obvious than with Superman. Comic book fans continue to cling to the Christopher Reeve version of the character. The bright smile, the red trunks, the cat-saving icon of the 70s. It's a comforting image, but it belongs to a different time. Those were films made under different cinematic expectations, judged by different standards. Take Reeve's Superman turning back time to save Lois Lane by reversing the Earth's rotation, a fantastical, almost cartoon-like moment that fans celebrate as heroic. But when you look closer, It's a profoundly irresponsible act. In trying to save one life, he rewrites the fate of the entire planet. People who were meant to die may now live. People who would have lived may never be born. Time, causality, all altered because Superman couldn't let go of a personal relationship. Even his Kryptonian father explicitly warned that tampering with time was forbidden, underscoring how reckless the decision truly was. And if Lois were to die again, would he do it again? Would he do it for anyone else he loves? Or is it only Lois who justifies bending reality itself? Yet when Henry Cavill's Superman kills Zod to save innocent lives in Man of Steel, those same fans condemned it as a betrayal of the character. But morally, which is worse, violating physics to undo death, or making an impossible choice to prevent more of it? The truth is, modern portrayals are wrestling with something deeper: complexity. In James Gunn's upcoming Superman film, an early scene reportedly shows Clark stopping an armed conflict, proud of his actions, until Lois challenges him. She asks if stopping a war is as heroic as it seems, and she's right to ask. Because what comes next? Stopping a war through brute intervention may look noble on the surface, but it's a dangerously simplistic and childish view of modern conflict. What if the parties involved refuse to stop fighting? Does Superman increase the level of force he uses? If so, where does that escalation end? If he disables a tank, could he kill the crew inside? Does he target one side or both? And if he does choose a side, does he become a symbol of American-style interventionism, inadvertently destabilizing fragile international relations? Wars are not playground fights. They're complex, politically charged, and often rooted in decades, even centuries, of tension. Superman's presence could embolden one faction while enraging another. His attempts to police the world could provoke resistance, backlash, or even wider conflict. His very intervention might break the geopolitical balance, making things worse in the long run. In that light, the scene isn't heroic, it's terrifying. It exposes just how unprepared we are to deal with the fantasy of a god among men trying to navigate real-world moral chaos. Saying Superman stopped a war might make fans cheer, but it's a painfully childish view of global conflict. From an adult analytical perspective, the one we use to judge modern films, Lois is right to question him. War isn't a comic book plotline. It's layered, generational, and fraught with unintended consequences. Superman's simplistic approach, no matter how well-intentioned, risks making him less a symbol of hope and more a blunt instrument in a fragile world. And she's right to ask, because what comes next? If Superman uses non-lethal force to end a war, why would the combatants stop? Knowing he won't kill or seriously harm them, where is the deterrent? Wouldn't they test his limits? Would he be forced to escalate until someone gets hurt? And what happens when his presence emboldens one side of a civil war, or he intervenes in regional conflicts without full understanding? At what point does he become a global actor rather than a hero? A destabilizing force shaped more by his own judgment than any international consensus. These aren't just hypotheticals. They're the unavoidable consequences of immense power. Yet many fans resist this shift. They want the image of Superman as infallible, pure, and apolitical. They want him to save cats from trees, not weigh the ethics of foreign intervention. And in doing so, they ignore one of the most powerful ways these stories can grow, by holding a mirror to our world, not escaping it. The fantasy has value, but so does the challenge. This doesn't mean comic book fans are to blame for every failure, but their demands often conflict with what makes a great film: simplicity, emotion, and universality. Because most people don't care if Superman has red trunks. They care whether they feel something when he saves the day. So, are comic book fans ruining comic book movies? Maybe not intentionally, but by demanding purity over adaptation and lore over storytelling, they may be pushing the genre into a niche it worked so hard to escape. The best comic book movies didn't just follow the source, they transcended it. And if the genre is to survive, it might need to stop looking to the comic shop and start looking back to the cinema. This is all about the comments, like subscribe and stay curious, because the next story might just rewrite the script again.